So, edible plants and herbs, making the most of your backyard. I have a little bit in here about myself, and so I'm a backyard edible hobbyist and a librarian by trade, and not an expert or herbalist. I offer this program for your information and enjoyment and hope that you find the joy and the quest for backyard edibles as I do. The information provided in the program is for informational purposes only, and any use of the plants mentioned in this program are up to the user to decide for safe use. Also, just note that some plants and herbs may affect users who have underlying health conditions or on medicines, so please consult with your doctor if you're not sure. All right, so I started with resources at the beginning here because I got a lot of the information that I got and that I've learned by using these. So the two that we're going to focus on most is this first one called Backyard Foraging, 65 Familiar Plants You Didn't Know You Could Eat. And then the second one that I found really helpful is Rosemary Gladstar's Medicinal Herbs, A Beginner's Guide. The last one listed here is just a lot of fun. And if you really get into using backyard edibles for different kinds of things, this herbal goddess, discover the amazing spirit of 12 healing herbs with teas, potions, salves, food, yoga, and more. It's just a lot of fun, and it actually has some more recipes and things like that than some of the other books do. These books up here, especially Backyard Foraging, does a really great job of showing you what the plants look like, talking about the parts that are edible, how they grow, a little bit about harvesting, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of recipes. This book here, Medicinal Herbs, A Beginner's Guide, does give you quite a few recipes for starting things, and I'm actually going to talk a little bit at the end of this program about some really simple basic recipes that you can use to start with if you want to play around a bit. So why edible plants? So for me, I find joy in seeing what nature offers in my backyard. I've always enjoyed nature, and I'm constantly amazed at the bounty that nature provides. So it's amazing to me that you can walk out your door and see something growing that you didn't plant and that nature just sort of left there for you, or the birds left there for you. And to discover how many different things you can do with these plants is just incredible. I bought a house in the country several years ago, and I had grown up in the suburbs, and so I knew I wanted a house in the country, but was not aware of quite how much I was going to get from that experience. And I have really discovered a lot of different things that I can use, and have, again, found great joy in just learning and the discovery of it. Some of them are incredibly tasty, as you'll note. Some of them can be bitter, as we'll note later. But some of them also have amazing properties. A lot of things have been used in digestive aids or to help with coughs or colds and things like that. And there's plenty of information out there about it and different ways that you can use different kinds of plants. So some considerations as we get started. Where were the plants found? And it might seem like something that is pretty self-evident, but it's worth considering, were the plants found near a driveway where maybe a winter salt was used to help melt the ice. You want to stay away from anything that is near pesticides. You definitely want to use a yard that is clean of pesticides, and then be careful of, if you're finding things like along a roadside, that you might get things like salt, and you might get things like things to help dissolve the salt. Do the plants appear to be healthy, or are they wilted or brown? So one of the best things to look for is to make sure that your plants are nice and, vibrant looking. Do you have any health conditions that may interact with the plants? And that's something I mentioned. So a couple of the books on the resource list go into some of the different things that it might affect. Some plants, for example, might have an effect on you if you're on a blood thinner or something like that. So those are good to know about, and you are your best advocate for that, I think. If you know that you have some of those things that you want to make sure before you take anything, like any other foods or medicines, that you're just being careful it won't interact with that. Amount. Oh, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So lots of these are great in small amounts that I'm going to talk about. But as in anything, I don't know if, if some of you like me like dairy, and you find that sometimes eating too much dairy is not so great for your stomach. And same thing with these. So you want to just do everything in moderation. Leaving some for the birds and the bees for next year's crop. So a lot of the things we're going to look at are considered weeds anyway, and so people will often pull them out or dig them out to get rid of them. But if you're going to be using them in edibles, or as edibles rather, you want to make sure that you're leaving some too for the next year. And part of that is leaving some for the birds and the bees so that they can, again, expand your crop for you for the following year. Lookalikes. Big one with edibles. You want to make sure that your plants are actually the edibles that you think they are, and that they aren't poisonous plants that just look like your edibles. So we'll talk a little bit about that and some common plants and things to look out for as we get going too. When in doubt, leave it out. And I couldn't help but put a really bad pun in here. If you're not sure, still leave it be. So if you look at something and you're like, it kind of looks like this, but the leaves look a little different, they're pointy instead of round, or etc. like that, leave it out. If you really don't know, if you don't find it in a good, reliable book, just let it be, because it's better to be on the safe side. And timing is everything. Plants change their taste at different times during the season. So we'll talk about when the best time to harvest things are and how it changes the taste. So for example, often if you harvest buds and things like that in the spring, they taste really good. That's when they have a lot of flavor to them. As the season goes on, things might become more bitter. So some uses for edible plants. And found this great little slide with little icons here, but we've got tonics, teas. I like to do a lot of teas, salads, coffee, and I'm going to talk about one of my favorite new caffeine-free coffees during this, salves, lotions, and good old aromatherapy. And today we're going to talk about several. We have dandelions, peppermint, milkweed, which is growing like crazy right now, which is fantastic for our butterflies, hosta, daylily, elderberry, red sumac, garlic mustard, wild black raspberries, echinacea, and red clover. So the first thing we're going to talk about is dandelions. This plant is amazing, and I have to say I just started experimenting with this one this year, and it has become my favorite weed because the flowers are edible, the leaves are edible, the roots are edible. The leaves are a little bit bitter, and they can be used in salads. They can be really good for digestion. It's definitely something to play around with and see if you like the taste of it, because again, it does have that bitter quality to the leaves. You might want to add some other type of leafy greens to sort of offset that, or add some nice salad dressing. But again, they're actually really good for you and can be used in salads. The flowers, those bits you're actually going to pull when you take these. You will pull them from what they call the calyx, which is the green part at the base of it. And those petals can be used to make teas, to make tonics. It's a really light flavor. It's kind of like not quite a chamomile, but something like that, I would say, to compare it to. So those make really lovely teas. They can also be used, again, in salads just to make some pretty color in your salads. And then my favorite thing I have to say is the root. So if you take the root of the dandelion up, it's kind of a long piece. It looks a little bit like almost like a thin ginger root. What you would do with those is you can actually let them dehydrate for a little bit, and then you put them in your oven just on a regular baking sheet at about 350 degrees for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Take them out, let them sit, cool them down. Chop them up in your coffee grinder or your food processor, and it makes a most delicious caffeine-free coffee alternative. It has a little bit of a molasses taste to it, a little bit of a chicory taste to it. So good. Honestly, one of my favorite things so far. They're best in early spring. As time goes on, again, they become more bitter. Oops. And here's the coffee that I mentioned. So you want to harvest the taproots, clean them off. The cleaning is a little bit of a process. I have learned this, that you probably want to try to clean them outside if you can, so you don't clog up your sink. Use a vegetable brush to just make sure you get all the dirt off. And then you're good to go. Just chop that from the rest of the flour and make your roots about the same size before you put them on the baking sheet. And you can make your own tasty brew. And the petals, again, I mentioned over here that those can be good for teas. You can strain the petals from the liquid and just enjoy it as is, but it can also be used as a base for tonics, for cocktails, and jellies. So I have a recipe at home that I have not yet tried, but it is for dandelion rose jelly, and I am really looking forward to trying that this summer. Peppermint. So most of us know peppermint. We've seen it. We might have some of it in our yard. It grows like crazy. I personally have let my peppermint get a little bit out of control because I really enjoy it. So we have both the leaves and the flowers that are edible. For harvesting, I missed that. Sorry, I missed putting that in there. But you want to harvest it usually before the flowers start for the most fragrant part of the leaves. But again, the flowers are edible as well. It contains calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And it's commonly used as a digestive aid. So again, if you have an upset stomach or something, it might make a good herbal tea. Sometimes even just smelling it will help settle the stomach or sort of clear the air, clear the nasal passages even. So mint is one of those ones that I think is fantastic. You can use it with so many things, and it grows like crazy. So it's almost like you'll never run out of it. And again, I just mentioned a couple of things here. Milkweed. So I feel like I have a friend that introduced me to milkweed and cooking with milkweed probably about 10 years ago, which is crazy to say now. And it may have been like my first foray into edible plants. And I was astounded when he said you could eat it, but it was so true and it was so tasty. So milkweed is wonderful for attracting monarch butterflies. It's one of those things in our area that if you can and it doesn't bother you to leave it in your yard, it's a really great thing for pollinators. And again, it's edible. So it creates these beautiful little flower or florets when it's in bloom. You can pick those. You can eat the pods, the milky pods that we'll see in a moment, I believe. And before these even get to bloom, you can pick the green part too when it's still just a bunch of buds. So the way I had it before, and I thought it was really good, is to take the little buds before they even get to this flowering point, and it tastes a little bit like a combination of broccoli / Brussels sprouts. So if you put that with a little bit of olive oil, if you like salt and pepper and garlic, it's actually really good. The pods, you do want to be careful with the pods, and you want to pick those when they're firm and about 1 to 1.5 inches. So as they start getting bigger, they start developing, you've probably seen it, that sort of almost like that dandelion fuzz that sort of starts to fly around so that the seeds spread. So you don't want them at that point. So you want to pick them when they're about 1 to 1.5 inches. And again, you can saute those as well and cook those up. Couple things to keep in mind. You don't want to eat milkweed parts raw. So this is a plant that you do want to cook. It's tasty when you pick them and eat them, but you do want to cook it. It's suggested that you want to blanch the parts first. So whether you're using the pods or you're using the bunches of flowers, that you want to blanch those first and then finish them off in some other way. So you can saute them, you could roast them, a couple of different things. I think sometimes people will actually batter and fry them. And then lastly, the flowers themselves, they can be simmered with a sugar and water to make a simple syrup. So if you're looking to make a homemade cocktail, something a little bit different, that's something to try to create a nice light flavored cocktail. Okay, I have to say this one really surprised me when I found out that hostas were edible, but they are. and I tried it, and they're actually really tasty. So if you like a light lettuce type taste, hostas are actually really amazing. It is suggested that you pick them when they are younger. So when the plants, when the leaves themselves are just starting to unfurl, that's when they're the most tasty. But you can eat the regular full leaves like this as well. So the early shoots and flowers, again, are the most recommended. You can saute them, you can stir fry them, and then you can use them as a side vegetable. Taste will vary depending on the type of hosta, since there's so many hosta varieties. So again, just use your, use your palate and see what you like, and feel free to experiment. This was another crazy one. Daylilies. I don't know about you, but I have tons of these that come up around my house, and they, again, just expand like crazy. You can actually eat the flower buds, the shoots, the petals, and the tubers. Harvesting, unopened buds can be harvested between 1 to 3 inches long. So that's when you see actually the little green part. Up above, if you're looking at my flower picture here, you can see sort of in the background, there's a little bit of a bud that you can see that's about 3 inches or so. So you can actually harvest those and eat those just like greens. They have a slight like green bean kind of taste to them. You can also harvest the tubers. So the roots of these can be picked and used like a fingerling potato. Those are best in the early spring and roasted like mini potatoes, as I say here. The reason you want to pick them in the fall or the early spring is because that's when they're best and most tastiest because of the energy that they've stored. So it's before the plant actually uses the energy to create these flowers and the loveliness that we see. So the roots at that point, the tubers, are the most tasty when they've got all that great energy in there. And then harvesting, young shoots and petals can be eaten raw, or they can be cooked with oil and herbs. Elderberry. I wish I had more elderberry in my yard. I have only seen a few small crops of it, but it is lovely. And if you have elderberry in your yard, it's amazing. What I will say about this is be careful not to pick the red berries, because sometimes you'll see in your yard clusters of berries like this that are that bright red. That's not elderberry. That's something you want to stay away from, because that'll make you sick. But these, if you see the reddish kind of vines here, and you see the berries that have turned this nice dark purple blue color and in bunches like this, it's a really sweet fruit. It's high in antioxidants. It makes great syrups. You can eat it on its own. You'll hear sometimes people making elderberry tonics with a belief that it can be really good for the immune system and helping with colds and flus and things like that. So you want to gather again when these berries are nice and purple and dark, and when the flowers are fully open. And again, here's a few more uses. You can use it to make elderberry wine. You can make jams and jellies. And then the flowers you can use to make fried fritters, and you can use it to make elderflower liqueur. Red sumac. Now, sumac, again, is one of those ones where you have to be careful. And I know a lot of people hear sumac and they think, oh, poison, bad. Well, the red sumac, as long as you don't have allergies and things like that, and you have to know that yourself, but the red sumac can actually be really good and really tasty. You can take these little berries that are on one of the sumac cones, and you can boil those down, and it makes a nice tart beverage that you can either drink as is, or you can use to supplement in some other things. I haven't tried this yet, but I really want to try like a lemonade sumac drink, because I think with the tartness, that would actually be really good. So you want to pick the cones when in bloom before rain, if possible. When the cones and the blooms get rain, it starts to wash away some of the I don't know if it's like a film, but it's part of it that actually makes the taste as tasty as it is. So some of the tartness starts to wash away the more it rains. You want to put them in a paper bag for 2 to 4 weeks, and then you can store them later for use in a glass jar if you want to. And again, I put a note here, use only the red sumac. Stay away from the white sumac. The white sumac you do not want to use. And here's a couple more things. As I mentioned, you can soak the berries in water and brew it cold or hot, and then strain and sweeten as desired. So for cocktails, you could actually soak them in rum or vodka and then strain, and you've got a nice tart refreshment. And then as a lot of some of the other things, you can simmer and juice the berries and use that as a base for jam and jelly making. Garlic mustard. Okay, garlic mustard. I did not know what this was for a while, and I thought it was just kind of pretty. And then I realized you could eat it, and it was awesome. So the first year, garlic mustard looks like this. The leaves have sort of this almost like heart shape, kind of like feathery edging to it. And that is when they are the most tasty and garlic-like. So the garlic flavor can be somewhat intense. So I would say if you like garlic, go for it. If you're kind of not that crazy about garlic, you might want to pass on this one. But that first year when the leaves look like this is when you're going to get that nice, intense garlic flavor. After the first year, you'll notice the plant looks more like this, and some of you may have seen this in your backyard. So you start to get this sort of like small cluster of buds up here. And it's not as intense, but you can still harvest the stalks before the flowers have opened. And you can trim those off, and you can use that lower part of the base as well and use those in salads and things like that. It's also high in fiber, vitamin C, E, zinc, iron, and calcium. And here's just a couple more things that you can chop and mix the first year greens with olive oil and seasonings. You can add to egg dishes like souffles and scrambles and soups. And the second year greens, you probably want to more like chop them, steam them, saute them, and add them to soups and things like that. I put this one in here just for fun because I love wild black raspberries. And if you have seen this plant growing in your yard, you've seen like the reddish kind of branch here with the thorns, and you see the leaves that look like this, and you've been wondering what it is, there's a good chance it's black raspberries because we have a lot of these, and they, again, grow like crazy. So they start off and they get this nice pinkish color to them. When they're just coming in, you want to wait until they're this nice dark purple color here, and they're sweet like red raspberries, but they again have a little bit more tartness to them, a little bit more like I would say between a cross between a red raspberry and a blackberry. And they grow in abundance, and you can use them for so many things like jams and jellies and wine, etc. Echinacea, also known as coneflower. These you can use the roots, the leaves, and the flowers. You want to gather the leaves in late spring and gather the flowers when the buds begin to ripen, and then gather the flowers when they're in full bloom. So things that you can use echinacea for often are throat sprays and tinctures. You'll see this a lot of times when people are trying to fend off a cold or something like that, or help boost their immune system. They'll use echinacea teas and tinctures and things like that. And I think this is the last of the flowers or plants that I have on here. I've got a couple more things after this, but in terms of the actual plants, this is red clover. And this is, again, one that I learned about this year. The flowers themselves, you've probably seen these growing wild, are extremely edible, and they are super tasty. So when I first started this, I had read that they had a bit of like a honey kind of flavor to them, and I thought that that probably wasn't going to turn out to be true, but it is. They have a really nice, pleasant, mild sweetness to them, and you can actually just pick these right off the top, pop them in your mouth, and eat them. I mean, you can just do that. They are high in vitamin C and calcium and zinc. And then you can use them for other things as well. So like a lot of our other things that we've looked at, you can use them in tonics and syrups and teas. And then again, as I said, you can eat them just as is. So the last part of this program, I was just going to mention a few general things to remember. So general harvesting tips. Roots are best harvested in fall or early spring. And again, that goes back to what I mentioned with the energy that they store and being the most tasty at that point. The leaves are best harvested when young, before the plant is in full bloom. And buds and flowers are best harvested when just opening. And again, the leaves, the flowers, and that kind of stuff, those you want to pick early on before they get too bitter, because as the time goes on, those things become more bitter. And here's some general recipes. And for all of you that are attending today, if you want to, I can send out the PowerPoint so that you can see this and you can get some of these general recipes. But they're really simple things. So you can use fresh or dried herbs for these. If you're using fresh herbs, you want to use a little bit more, dried herbs a little bit less. Infusions are ones where you pour the boiling water over the herbs in a jar and let that sit for a bit, and then strain it and enjoy it. Decoctions, it's very similar, except you're actually putting these in a saucepan and somewhat cooking them, and letting them simmer for a period of time, and then straining and enjoying them. Syrups. So syrups are, again, similar to the teas and the decoctions. You can simmer these down, though. You want to add a little bit of sweetener. You can use things like maple syrup, I think honey, brown sugar I've seen. So any of those kinds of things, you want to put about 2 ounces of herbs per quart of water, and then simmer it 20 to 30 minutes or until the mixture kind of starts to just thicken a bit. And you can remove that from the heat, put it in a bottle, let it cool, and then store into the refrigerator for up to several weeks. And again, you can take these just as a teaspoon if you want, just if you like the syrup and you just want like a teaspoon of elderberry syrup. Again, I've seen people do that for like a cold home remedy for colds and things. But you can add them to, gosh, I'm just thinking if you have oatmeal or something like that and you just want to sweeten it up a little bit, if you have a cup of tea and you want to sweeten it up a little bit, you can use your syrups in that way as well. Oils. I mention oils in here because the one right after this talks about how you can make salves. And so you would first make an oil. So you'd use herbs in a double boiler just so that they don't burn, and cover with about 1 inch or 2 of olive oil. Olive oil is really one of the better oils to use for something like this so that it keeps. You want to bring it to a slow simmer and simmer it for about 30 to 60 minutes. And then strain the herbs, let it cool, and bottle it. And here's where I was talking about the salve. So once you've made your oil, you can actually make a salve of your oil that you've already made by adding a 1/4 cup of beeswax per the cup of oil. You'll heat that up, just let it get nice and melted. And then you can pour that, remove it from the heat, pour that into glass jars, and you'll have a nice little hand salve that you can use with your with your herbs and your backyard edibles. You can try the process. If your salve is too hard, you can add more oil the next time that you make it. If the salve is too soft, you can add more beeswax when heating. Tinctures. So tinctures are kind of fun too. They do involve alcohol. You can use replacements, such as I've seen, I think it was cider vinegar and something else. I think it was a type of vegetable glycerin. But really, alcohol is the best because they'll keep the longest. And you're really only using a very small amount. So you cover your herbs in a glass jar, pour enough alcohol in to cover them a couple of inches, seal the jar tightly, and place it in a warm spot for 4 to 6 weeks. So about every day, you'd want to just shake slightly your mixture. Just make sure the herbs are good and coated again and moving around. And then after that time, strain the herbs, pour it into a glass jar, store in a cool, dry place, and then just take as needed or as desired. And that's it. Again, here's the resources that I've been using and that I thought might be interesting in case you do want to know more or get into this. There's tons of other kinds of plants in these books as well. I used ones that I had some experience with and that I have growing in my yard, just because I felt more comfortable with that. But if you have other things that you want to know about, there's tons of information in here. And then I just wanted to say thank you, that I hope you've enjoyed the program and that you're excited to start your own backyard foraging. These books also have additional recipes for use, so feel free to experiment. And again, we'll be posting this to our YouTube page so you can see the slides again and the resources with that as well.